Hey Carson, how you doing?
Hey, Sean.
You
Nice
ready
to
to do
be
some?
back.
It is. I'm feeling rested and
Yeah.
refreshed.
Yeah.
Uh, so today we're going to take a look at some cleanup. So we already have adjusted this sucker. We've sharpened it. We've got it into the right resolution space, and boy, it's looking great. But it's got a ton of noise on there. Now, a lot of this stuff would have come out if we had a fresh scan of it, like when it was made, right? Um, but the thing is that this blue line pencil is kind of degraded over time, and there's a lot of other, sort of funkiness on here that we want to address. So,
So I
especially
I
like,
have one
yeah,
question about the funkiness actually. And I don't know, maybe this is too far off topic, but there seems to be a question of aim in all of this. Like if you go
mm-hmm,
down to Warlock's face at the bottom, that's that mechanical
yeah,
character's name, right?
mm-hmm,
Like a lot of the ink wash there having the gray in it is really beautiful.
right,
Like on his chin, there's some marks that if we go all the way black, or I mean, even up in his head, there's a lot of directional marks that if you go all the way black, get rid of. So, what's the like, how do we think about making those decisions of like getting this to be all in the 50% threshold or when and where we should preserve wash?
that is a great question. That is a very very good question. I usually err on the side of, uh, you know, going with everything as line art. Um, but when you have something like this where you've got all these characteristics of that, yeah, I'd be very tempted to do some portion of that wash. But there is a halfway point that we can approach, and so let's do the general cleanup and let's table that
Okay.
discussion towards the end. Yeah, so basically, what we're going to do now is this is very interesting. You get a little peek in the drawing process. Whatever tool he was using to do the horse, he did the first bit of wings and then got dissatisfied with something about it and then switched over to the pen.
Yeah.
Um, and you can see that pen is going to reproduce just fine, whereas the brush or whatever he was using before, if we don't do some kind of intervention, we're going to have some sort of issues. Same with the unerased pencil and some of the dark blue there. So um, we're going to actually do most of this. So let's go ahead and do this. First I'm going to hit M. This brings up our marquee tool. And I'm going to use this marquee tool to draw a box on the outside. I'm going to do the same thing here. You can see the little switchbacks that are going over the frame. So in advance, I would talk to the artist as to whether or not they want me to take care of some of those. So sometimes, uh, somebody wants it to look as clean as possible, and if they had more time, they might have whited that out. And sometimes people are fine with that look. It's really not, you know, if everything else is fairly clean, it's not a big deal.
I'm assuming with the Sienkiewicz page, you just go, yeah, like let it be.
Right, exactly. I mean, he's a master inker, and he's doing the thing he wants to do. I'm not going to mess with that. Um, uh, then again, like a lot of the Cerebus pages, I talked to Dave, and Dave is on record saying in his early years, "Don't look at the corners of my boxes, because I'm really sloppy." So he wanted me to do that. He was happy. He
Yeah.
would have done it himself if he'd had more time. Okay, so I've marked off all those areas now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use I'm going to go hit G, which brings up the paint bucket, and I've got black right now, so I'm going to hit X, which brings up my other color, which is white, and I'm going to dump that in the area on the outside, and that will be fairly dramatic. I don't know why everything is so slow
Why not
right
just
now,
delete it?
and now we've got it all way way better, and you can start to see like people really futz with stuff way too much, because that is really like, there's some problematic things here with this stuff left, but um that's a huge improvement right there.
Yeah.
So see this screen here, this was paste up, and it's got this sort of film on it. I'm going to use the dodge tool for this. The dodge tool is a photographic tool that basically just changes the exposure on the area that you're drawing. Never, ever, ever use the dodge tool um, on screen tone or anything that has an iterative pattern to it. Because unless you're very careful, you'll leave evidence of what you've done. You don't want any of these things to be visible. So I hold my when I'm doing something like this, I hold down the pen so that I'm only making one mark across the whole thing, because that'll make it so that the Photoshop program only applies the dodge tool once. So if you click your pen multiple times, like I do that, and then I take my pen off and then I click it again, it's applying that multiple times. So I have the dodge tool right now set up so that it's only affecting what's called the highlights. This is only the lightest areas of the thing. But the thing is, if you keep on applying it to the same area, even if something looks fairly dark, it'll still knock it out, because the midtones are gradually becoming the highlights as you apply it. And the main thing I'm
you could
concerned,
do that with the dodge tool, because I was watching you and the black's just staying. I was like, how is he doing that?
Yep.
Genius.
You got to change it. You got to change it to highlights. So it's only affecting what it's considering the highlight areas. And you can do the same thing with the burn tool, which we are going to do with some of the cleanup. And you just change it so that it's only affecting the shadows or the midtones. And you can see that what I'm attempting to do here is get rid of anything that was not intended to reproduce. And so that includes basically pencil lines, in most cases, guidelines. Those are the big things for me. Things that are like, somebody did not intend this to be visually apparent on the finished page. A page this vintage, the most typical things that you'll see for an actual cleanup job are going to be blue line guides, notes from an editor on the side, things like that. And the thing is, if we hadn't done this like heavy sharpening, some of these things wouldn't have actually appeared in the first place. But we use that sharpening to pull out every detail. Well, this is detail. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You're changing the game right now. I'm watching this and I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I would have been like, oh, you gotta go around and select everything and delete it all and like go in and erase it. And this is
for your benefit, the speed that I'm doing this. I could do this probably, I don't know, twice as fast as I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Because I generally would not, I would do it more zoomed out than I am, because I know from, years now of experience what, I don't have to be this far in. I'm this far in because I'm showing it to you,
Yeah.
So this would be much faster doing it myself with a big brush. But that is most of the cleanup right there.
I would have never thought to use that tool, and I had no idea that tool did the highlight function. So that's amazing. And then we'll go reverse, like on the wings, you'll put it on the darken.
You got it.
Oh, that is genius.
Thank you. So that was the dodge tool, which lightens. And now we're going to use the burn tool. And you can see that I've already got it set to midtones. So we're going to try it on midtones and see if that does it. So let's zoom in on this. I'm always on the lookout when I'm doing cleanup for these types of watery areas that are not going to meet our 50% threshold. You can see if I turn on my threshold, what's happening right now.
Yeah, and I mean, like, how many books have we seen reprinted with exactly that kind of look in them?
Right.
And
it's not, it's arbitrary, it's not like the artist intended that. The artist wanted all these lines to be black. And the only exception being, I am on the lookout for dry brush or things like that I can sort of accentuate the look of. But mentally, our goal is to, mentally, what I'm trying to do is accommodate the original goals of the artist.
Yeah.
And his goal and her goal, the two who are working on this, is that these lines were going to be black. They were going to be reproduced.
Yeah, and this is where on this it's very obvious these are black, but this is so cool to watch this too. Like, I think a bunch of people are gonna like, holy shit moment right now. But that ink washy stuff at the bottom is where it's less obvious what the goal is. And that's what makes it difficult. But the other thing is knowing that this is going for like color reproduction, the assumption is going to be, oh, well, that's probably meant to be black.
Right. Yeah, and that is probably the case. But that doesn't mean we can't do it in a different way. So I'll show you a few different ways to handle that. Yeah. So whenever you got something that has got some really juicy brush marks and you want to preserve it, and it's going to be in black and white, that's in a whole other set of questions. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at this right here.
This is amazing.
The threshold on and off. So you can see that most of this looks pretty good. We might be losing just a little bit. So we're losing this line right here and the Warlock's legs. We're losing most of the dress. So if we want all those things to reproduce as lines, we're going to do one pass of this here. And because we've sharpened it prior to this, because, this is an excellent scan, this is not actually getting thicker. It's just getting darker. But if you had a blurry scan and you were doing this, you might have it be thickening up as well. So you would have to watch out for that, because this is basically like the perfect ideal scan. We don't have that issue. You can see.
And when you're saying it looks pretty good, that's because you're used to Photoshop doing a terrible job of representing it on screen, but
Right.
doing a good job of output. Because when you put that on, I go, oh my God, that's so bad.
Right. Yeah. And that's because Photoshop sucks at this thing right here is like an approximation. This threshold filter. Photoshop does not draw the image for you at the proper resolution when you have that threshold thing. It's just like a shorthand.
Yeah.
So every time I turn this on, this is the reason that people get freaked out by line art. But it's so much better actually in print, and it's so much better actually when you flatten it as a 1-bit image. So right now,
when you sent me like Strange Death of Alex Raymond, like here it goes, I was like, this looks bad, but I know what Sean does, so I'm gonna trust him. I think that hair, Warlock's hair too, was pretty blown out.
So yeah, his hair is the same thing with the other stuff that we were talking about. Like, it's so cool to see it. So let's go ahead and talk about this. So the way this is drawn, because we've talked about like Sergio Tope and somebody like that.
Yeah.
The way it's drawn right now is not going to be the way that we reproduce in black and white in a general setting. And so if we're going to do it, if we're going to have really, really high quality print, one of the things we can do is select certain panels or areas or things like this to give special treatment to. And because this is its entire panel, we can talk about that separately. But let's talk about this one first. So if we want to get something of the look of what this actually looks like, let's select this separately. And I've pasted it now onto its own layer, so we'll be able to compare. And one of the ways that we can do this is just sharpen the bejesus out of it. So if you put the threshold all the way down, let's do the thing that I told you not to do before.
Yeah.
And we make our amount go to 500.
Oh, okay.
And you can see, keeping our radius a little higher too, we can just get this thing to look what looks really noisy.
Yeah.
On screen anyway.
And what we're looking at here is the fact that the darker marks writing on top of the lighter marks create a sense of like depth and space that would get rid of when it's flattened out. And then that's where the question is, like, was that the intention of the artist to create some of those effects, or was the intention black and white?
Right.
That's why if people aren't sure why we're looking at this or bothered about it.
And then you can see that if I turn on I don't know if I'm getting like lag from Zoom or what, but it's kind of irritating. If I turn on the threshold thing again, you get a sense of what's happening with that effect. So essentially, we're just making this thing really, really noisy in comparison to the surrounding areas. But that is going to reproduce closer to what the dry brush looks like. So oftentimes, if I really want to capture an area of dry brush, So let's turn that off so you can see the comparison. Once
Yeah,
again,
especially in the hair. Yeah.
so oftentimes what I'll do with something like this is rather than do this across an entire figure or something like that, I'll grab just a couple areas that are getting lost in translation and do that too. And when you're actually in print with this, it's a very cool look. You know, it's a neat look. But then the other possibility for something like that, you know, and once again, we're already so far beyond the original printing. It's not like, you know, turning this into black and white is really going to, you know, be a huge difference. But if you actually wanted to preserve this entire thing and you decided, hey, it really is important that this panel looks like it does right here, what you can do is you can select this entire panel right here. Just go ahead and do it. So I'm going to select it with my marquee tool. I'm going to hit Control C. And I'm going to go to File, New. And I'm going to create. And so now we've got this panel copied over. And I'm going to go to Edit, Image Mode. Oh, I've got too many channels. Okay, so I'm going to go to Image Mode Bitmap. And instead of using, I'm going to turn this into a bitmap, but instead of using the 50% threshold, I'm going to use what's called diffusion dither. And this has now made a microscopic version of the thing that I was just talking about.
Okay.
So what this does is at the resolution that you're at, Photoshop just makes on and off single pixels to represent the thing, essentially in grayscale, but this is not an actual grayscale image. This is a 1-bit image that can be used like so. So now what I do is I hit Control A, Control C for copy. I can paste that back in on its own layer, and then I can get rid of any parts that I actually still want to be grayscale. So I'll use my eraser tool, and I can erase out the scream, or even better than erase, I can use that, make an image mask, and I can mask off, just by drawing on it, I can mask off the areas that I still want to be line art.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because you want the letters to.
Yeah, so I'll turn off
crispy.
I'll turn off the bottom layer so you can see it. Something along those lines there. And this might be an argument for doing a selection at this point. But basically, something along those lines would allow.
And you could go back and get like those little tiny strands of hair and stuff if you're really being nerdy about it.
Exactly, if you're really being super nerdy. So like, you know, if you're doing something like Sergio Tope, or you're going to do like a black and white only version of this issue, or something that has a bunch of this type of calligraphic stuff, then you could do this on a panel by panel basis, and you would have some of those things, some of those images have that same kind of, you know, depth that the original art did.
Yeah.
While having everything be super hyper crisp. So this is not halftoning. It's not the same thing as halftoning. It's essentially a type of stochastic screening using this microscopic, you know, level adjustment. The only other thing,
obviously, if you have access to the artist, then you say, "Hey, which look do you prefer?" But if you don't, then it's just kind of, you have to make a guess. I would think, like, from my viewpoint as an artist, I would choose to preserve that one as is, because the mark making communicate, it's not just like, oh, I'm randomly filling in blacks. It's really communicating form in a way that seems intentional to me, versus like up in the bushes up at the top where it's just like, yeah, I'm filling it in. I mean, it's a cool look, but it doesn't have, like you said, that calligraphic, like boom, boom, boom. I would think that's how would be making those choices, not having access to the artist.
Right. And you know, ideally though, you get to talk to somebody and ask them. But yeah, that's that was my thought process. Um, and uh, and so, you'll notice that we spent all this time cleaning up the page, or talking about cleaning up the page.
Yeah.
And we spent almost no time filling in a bunch of blacks. This is the thing that, like, somebody who has not done this type of work really does. They enjoy it because there's something like very kindergarten zen about just going through and being like, I'm going to fill in every little dot in the black. You just don't
Yeah.
need to do it. Like, somebody inked this. It's a hand drawn object drawn
Yeah.
by a human being. It doesn't have to have, like, what does it matter if that is a little white speck? I mean, that's just like where his brush, missed out when he was going through. I mean, to me, that's part of the artwork in general. Um, as
Well,
long as the
especially on bushes, it's like that's where the light shows through, like
right,
like reality has some chaos like that. So
right. And for me, the more important exceptions would be something like this, where you can see this is where the blue line pencil was, and then it left like a wax resist.
yeah.
So, if I was being super anal, I might fill in some of that right there, because this is like a ghost of a balloon that's not there anymore. I mean, that's kind of
Yeah.
irritating.
Yeah.
So that's the type of stuff that I'm generally on the lookout for. I spend very, very little time making sure that all of the black is pristine. It's just not worth it. There's no very little positive as long as your scan itself is adjusted well, and you've made your initial decisions well. This should be a pleasure to do. This should be like you're revealing the art. you know so anyway, after we've done the cleanup, what I generally do is I save. I generally clean up like 4 pages to a batch, because that's as many as Photoshop can comfortably open and maintain speed with the amount of RAM that I have. And then I'll save them and close them, and then I'll open another batch. And then when I'm done with all that, we go to what I do is I write another script that turns all of this into a bitmap. So it looks like the person who scanned this a little bit overkill. They scanned it with a high with 16 bits per channel, which is way too much. That's what I was doing right there, is adjusting that back
Yeah.
down. So that's why this was also slow. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to image mode. I don't know, why is this not letting me do it? Okay, this is weird. So the Photoshop has changed something else recently. I'm going to flatten the whole thing. Discard hidden layers.
Adobe.
I know, Adobe.
Why you taking great things and ruining them, Adobe?
I don't know. And then I'm going to go to mode bitmap and make sure that my output is the same resolution. And I'm going to use the 50% threshold. And that is our finished page.
Oh, and that one at the bottom, that's nice. Yeah,
Yep.
still has it. And then
Still has
like again, don't be freaking out that it doesn't look particularly great at this mode, right? Because like to me, those bushes all of a sudden look kind of crappy, but they'll print way better than that.
Yeah, well, you mean the rendering choice of having the mid-tone popping out at the top, or just how flat it is?
No, just the way Photoshop renders on screen still looks
Yeah.
a little funky.
Yeah, it's better than it was, but you can
Yeah,
still
yeah.
see that the Photoshop does not like 1-bit images. Photoshop does not display them to best effect. But you can see that here's a good comparison of our two portions here.
Yeah. I mean,
our
those
two,
look way, way better.
and this one right here, by the way, anytime you're doing the diffusion dither, you're best off making sure that you do a little bit of lightening before you do it, because diffusion dither can have a tendency to fill in, especially if you're doing it at that resolution, the high resolution. That'll fill in a little bit on press. So I tend to lighten these up a little bit. I just grab the midpoint and move it up. Yeah, so little cleanup. So we've learned something from doing a really a page that had a lot of love. But still, even though I did all that, this would still probably be like 6 minutes for me to clean this page.
Yeah, and it looks beautiful.
And
if you blew my mind with the burn and dodge, that's like huge.
If you have a copy of this originally and you want to compare, I think that would be it'd be an interesting thing to look at. But this is a pretty good little preview of it. So let's take a look at one more page. If you've got time, Carson, do you mind if we clean one more page?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So let's take a look at a page from discards we were talking about in the other video. This is my long graphic novel that I wrote when I wrote a long ass time ago, and I drew about 240 pages of it before I abandoned it. I'm gonna see if I can get a page that
Before you discarded it.
Exactly. That is very true. That is exactly what happened.
But you're back on your bullshit now, and you're gonna finish it, which is awesome.
I am. Okay, so let's take a look at a page here. I'm just looking for a page that isn't going to spoil anything.
I like all the spoilery looks at what's on your screen there, though.
I know.
You're gonna start a cult.
Right. Okay, so here's a page from discards, and I've got a few actions over here that I was working on yesterday because I just scanned all this.
God damn, Sean, this looks like a really cool book.
Well, thanks, man.
I'm glad you're back at it.
Yeah,
it took some convincing, but
it did. You guys can thank Carson for persuading me that this is important. So I drew 240 pages of this before, and I did 2 different sizes. So this is one of the smaller sized pages. So let's see, what is the actual raw scan? So this is 7 1/3 inches by 11.4 inches.
Oh, tiny.
So yeah, fairly small, because I at the time I was just, really anal inker, and so the big pages didn't do me any benefit,
I wouldn't know what that's about.
Right, no. So I'm gonna hit my script for the smaller size, and yeah, I was playing around with this yesterday, and I was noticing that you really can't tell the difference between a page that was drawn giant and a page that was drawn small, because I just went all the way in.
Yeah,
the entire time.
By the way, I just went yesterday and had an initial consultation, and in 2 weeks I'm gonna be getting LASIK surgery.
Wow.
And so my anal Hawkeye is going to be even worse.
Okay, so here's our initial script here, and you like I said before in the other segment, I would run this as a batch, so I'm never having to sit around waiting for a computer to do this. And you can see I use some white here, so this is going to be one of the things that I'm looking at as I'm cleaning this page. Even though I don't
point out 2 techniques that I like that you're using. You're doing like the dry brush with the hatching over top of it, and then that reductive drawing with the white. That's a really nice glow effect over there.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I want to make sure that it comes across in print. So the very first thing I always do, just because it takes just a few seconds and just make sure you don't get some embarrassing thing, is I always put a little white box around anything that's not intended to be image area.
So why are you doing that on another layer rather than just deleting it?
Because I want to be able to see what I've done by turning on and off the cleanup.
Okay.
So if I'm doing something that's really labor intensive or goes over a certain area over and over again, I want to make sure that I'm actually getting the look that I want.
Gotcha.
Okay, so you can see a few things right in here that have to do with the whiteout that I used. It's just some noise that I'm not super comfortable with, that sort of is revealing the whiteout in a way that seems a little bit like naked to me. Like, you can see how I did it,
Yeah.
Sometimes this may be not a big deal at all, especially if it's like real confident looking stuff that doesn't mind, that. But in this case, this is not a particularly confident looking page. This is sort of a finessed like, looking thing.
Do you find that this is more difficult or more anal when it's your art?
Well, I drew this more than 10 years ago now, so it doesn't feel like my art anymore.
Okay.
No, yeah, I think that if I was doing this before, I might have had some issues with it, but yeah. So this little thing right here, I'm just using the brush tool and I'm holding shift which makes a straight line. You can see if you put it in the wrong place, that doesn't work. Undo that. I shift over to make that straight. These little stray things right here, this is the type of stuff where, you know, if everything else is super clean, maybe you can get away with it and it's not a big deal, but I just like to go ahead and get rid of it if it's not adding anything to the page. Just
So
gives
you're not a Bill Sinkiewicz.
No, I'm certainly not Bill Sinkiewicz in any way, shape, or form. In any way
You
that you
made
can
an
imagine.
eraser dot over there too on your tree.
What's that?
You
Oh,
accidentally erased part of your
yeah.
tree.
See, you were asking why I do it on another layer.
Yep. Okay, I gotcha.
That is why right there. So I turned on my threshold so that I can get a little look at this area right here. And actually, that looks fairly reasonable. But let's go ahead and I'll click on my background and let's just see what this would be like with some more sharpening. This is actually not bad, just as a starting point, but let's go ahead and try it and see what it would look like if it had a little bit more sharpening applied to it. So if I do a ridiculous amount, like we did with that warlock figure, it starts to look kind of a little chintzy. I kind of like that right there. That's bringing out some of the texture underneath. So I don't know if that's to its benefit or not. I think I kind of like it as is, right here.
I like the speckly look. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to cancel that. And then the other thing is, if it was supposed to be really pure white, one of the things you can do is you can use your dodge again, and you can just go in and dodge out some of those, especially if it's like you were saying, like a reductive white where you're not intending it to have any texture. This would be one way to sort of make some sort of micro adjustments on it.
I think on that one though, it looked nice to have that little speckle because it added
I
to
agree.
the glow effect of it.
Yep. I think this was in the right place when we started. So I'm just Control Z. I'm backing up all that. I think that was actually just as it is. And the thing about cleaning an entire book is you get lots of opportunities to realize, oh, hey, I use this technique over and over again. So now, you know, that's a decision I don't have to make anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. So another little thing here, I've got areas of dry brush right here.
With the hatching over top of it, which is a cool technique.
So I probably, rather than doing this with the diffusion dither, I think I'll probably just sharpen this more. Dry brush in general is something that can just get a little bit more sharpened than the other stuff, and then it has reproduces much, you know, cleaner. Or actually the opposite of cleaner. Rather than randomly blowing it out, it's just more itself. And so here I'm gonna turn that on again so you can see what it looks like.
The threshold really doesn't handle the cross hatching well. That was the thing that when I saw like the production files, I thought, oh my god, the cross hatching looks terrible. Just the way it represents in Photoshop.
Right, but then when
printed beautifully. Oh, that looks so good.
So then you can see how I can just bring up the amount of texture that I want. And the lower you get that threshold, the more of the grit it's getting.
Could you do that if someone had done like, say they had intentionally drawn, because I actually have this book that I just finished reading last night and I was going to make a video for today. And I'm not sure if the artist had done some lines. It looks like they may have done some like hatching, but with an intentional gray tone underneath. And so then the whole book is printed in halftones. I can't, it's hard to tell if it was all drawn in black and white, but it made me think about what if someone hatched a second layer in like a gray ink? Would that be the way to handle that?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
Because like this book, it's Fantagraphics, and you know, usually they have really good production, but it's all this very fine line work, and it's just disappointingly dots everywhere. But I was looking at it and it looked like the artist might have forced that a bit by drawing with a second layer of gray. And so this is interesting because I was just looking at that last night.
So you can see I did the same kind of thing on the window. So I obviously just thought that the hatching, the parallel hatching, was too assertive. And then I put this white in here. So the same thing, this is kind of a nice glow to have it like obviously breaking it up. But then
Yeah.
like this is obviously intended to be like totally white. And you know, since I get to speak for this guy, that was me,
Yeah.
10 or 11 years ago or whatever. I get to decide, okay, that's going to be pure white. So I'm going to use my dodge tool to make it so. Yeah, I mean, that's about it. So you can see I'm not going to do much
Yeah.
with these because at the time, anyway, I worked super clean. And so my main concerns are just making sure, you know, is everything actually going to reproduce? And if there's some edge cases like that, how is it actually going to be? So like another edge case, you know, this
Yeah.
on the window, that looks good to me. If I
Yeah.
go like that,
Ugh.
you see what I mean?
Yeah.
The lines
It's
were
too harsh. Yeah.
yeah, too hard. It's okay. But
But
I'm gonna take
I like the
Mhm.
glow of it being a little dirtied. So
And then some of the areas you can see I just drew this. Why did I do that? Oh.
just
Excuse
like
me.
a reflected light.
Yeah, but I did that
Yeah.
with a real thick impasto.
Yeah.
And so it's pure white, even in the reproduction. Anyway, so let's come out of screen
Yeah, I was
sharing.
gonna say on the window it looks a little Dale Keown to me. Because he is always drawn like you did on the breast there with that big thick
Right.
erased outline.
Yeah, I mean, I vaguely remember looking at the window thing and thinking about, you know, oh, well, how am I going to represent this particular thing? And looking at reflections for a little bit, like abstractly, and seeing how you kind of get these sort of weird, almost highlights, where it's not necessarily related to the object, but it can look like it's related to the object sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially with like stuff that's lit from the outside, where the light illumination is from outside the window and the interior is dark.
Yeah, you're getting like dark values from the things like refracting through the window, but then you're getting reflections from the things on outside, like overlaying them.
Right. But like I said, 11 years ago. So
Well, it looks great. I'm excited. I mean, obviously I'm excited about it because you showed it to me and I said, dude, why haven't you finished this? So really excited you're finishing it.
Well, thanks, man. It's been a weird experience looking at all the artwork. I just scanned
I bet.
everything. And yeah, it's nice. I'm a little bit more forgiving of myself now. I think now that the gap is so large, like that guy didn't care quite as much about character consistency, or at least I've improved on rendering characters more similarly from panel to panel now. And I think I'm a better designer now. But like, he could really ink. Like that's a pretty small original we were just looking at. And it looks the inking part of it is maybe even probably slicker than I could do, at least at the moment. But yeah, so it's been interesting to readjust to it. I've got a stack of like 65 pages that I've penciled so far, of the continuation of it, and I'm going to keep on trucking on that as soon as I've got a few other things cleared off my desk here. The goal is that I'm going to batch the entire thing. I'm going to pencil the entire book, so I can maintain that consistency and speed, and then I'm going to ink the entire thing. And hopefully my hand won't fall off. I sprained a finger in December, and that's kept my inking from being having quite as much finesse as it I would like it to for this.
Well, I think old you will beat young you in the inking. Like 5 to 10 pages in, you'll get in that flow state with all of the extra experience on top of it.
I'm hoping.
Yeah,
But
that's a good argument for batching. I feel the same way. Like a lot of people pencil ink, pencil ink, pencil ink, and I find that there's really something to be said about just getting zen with that one tool. And
right. Yeah, well, there's way less things to think about, and hopefully way less at that time when you're like, I'm ruining my own page.
Yeah, you just get it's a zone thing. You got to be in the zone.
I'm even kind of tempted to batch things like doing panel borders and stuff, inking panel borders, because that's definitely the same kind of thing. Like that's the first thing you do when you start inking. You're not really warmed up, and you go in and you're like, "Ugh," you know, it's just, um,
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know.
like beginning of the day stuff to me. Like just get your hand moving doing that. I did that on Strange Death actually. I did all the panel borders and like any of the lettering I had to trace as I was printing them out,
Hmm.
like months before I inked, because it was
Hmm.
just part of a different process in my mind. So yeah, then the fluidity is all
Right.
you just have to be willing to like let the first couple pages suck, or like print them out in blue line and go ink them and then re-ink them just to get warmed up. Yeah.
Well, I hope that you guys enjoyed that. It was a lot of fun, and you know, I hope that it's beneficial to everybody. You got any other parting thoughts, Carson?
No, that was totally revelatory. The burn and dodge thing, I'm like I'm running with that. I'm excited about that. I think you're gonna get a lot of comments of people being like, dude.
Well, I've done enough pages now. I think I'm up to like 5,000 or something at the Cerebus stuff,
Yeah.
which is a hell of a lot of work. It's a little weird to be doing it on my own stuff, but I'm glad that I'm going to be able to do it so quickly now. You know, that I'm only going to be spending a few minutes per page because I know what I'm doing, as opposed to that sort of labor. Like, you know, you're the person who's doing it
Yeah.
and you're the person who just drew it. You get this like, you know, futzy thing that I'm not going to have.
Yeah, I think the other biggest takeaway is that one of the reasons you're so good at this is we've now seen like you're a very good artist yourself. And so like a lot of the production people don't necessarily wouldn't even know to look at that Sinkiewicz page
Right.
and see, oh, this is intentional form building, mark making. It's just production stuff. And I think that's been illuminating as well, as understanding what an artist's eye, like a really good artist's eye, adds to the decision making.
Right.
So the more artists learn this stuff and can take control of their own work, that's a great thing.
Yeah. As long as you don't let it, you know, mentally run away with you, you know, and just always keep in mind that somebody at the printer can just click a wrong button and everything will be totally boofed.
Yeah.
So it can happen, you know,
Yeah.
even if you're 100% on the ball the entire time. So it does happen. You know, there really is a Star Wars card with C-3PO's metal schlong. There really was a postage stamp with a biplane flying upside down. You know,
Yeah.
at least you're not that guy.
Well, but like we learned on Strange Death, if you have all your T's crossed and your I's dotted, you know, and you can prove it, because
Yeah.
that happened to us. They screwed up massively, and Sean was able to go back and prove in the files
Right.
where it was their fault. And so that's another benefit of really knowing what you're doing, is when that happens, you can make that argument more
Yeah.
convincingly.
A proof and a signed quotation or contracts. And if somebody's not withholding or not upholding their end of it, and you know, the directions that you sent them say, do not do this thing, and then they do this thing, then, you know, they're the ones that are responsible. But yeah, and you know, print is it's a tough thing, but it's really rewarding when you get it right, and it's really rewarding when people can you know, see the artwork as best presented. So we're gonna keep on trying to do that. Speaking of which,
go get yourself the Strange Death of Alex Raymond, and you'll see the absurd precision of what Sean does and why all this stuff matters. And just like compare this to pretty much any other, you know, black and white reproduction book, and you'll see it's just absolutely gorgeous. You know, changed my, like I said, I was reading this by Fantagraphics. I only thought Fantagraphics had perfect reproduction, but comparing the two now, it's like, wow, you know, it's still a real big difference. So check that out and see for yourself.
yeah, I would appreciate that. And Carson, magnificent work on that. Always love getting comments from people who have been enjoying the book, and it's a really unique, one of a kind book. And I hope people out there, if you haven't checked it out yet, will pick up a copy. And hope you guys have a good one.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.